Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Axial SCX10-II project. Last time you guys saw this truck, it looked a little bit different. You had already seen me install the Proline Hilux cab and bed on it, but you will notice now that you're seeing some of the Honcho bodywork in the back. And what I've actually done is I picked up a full Honcho rear cage and bed insert, and then I've actually grafted on that Hilux bed to it. Now, as you can see, I cut out most of the interior to this bed, and then I am basically just sliding it over that Honcho bed frame. Now, again, I have not come up with all the attachment points that I'll be using for this piece yet, but I will get to that and to the mounting of that bomber interior that I've got inside of this cab in a later episode. But for now, I wanted to get it trimmed and mocked up into place just to know that it works. Also, you'll notice that I have a spare tire in the back now. The Honcho bed is built for that spare tire. In the last episode, I showed that I was using the new Pitbull Rock Beast XL 1.9s, and those are a big tire. That tire does not fit in the bed of this truck. However, if you have one of the old Pitbull Rock Beasts mounted up, that actually fits right in the back, and that tread pattern matches, and it will fool most people at first glance at least, and that's all I'm after. So I'll be using one of the old Rock Beasts in the back of this truck. Now, as far as trimming this bed out to make it fit, it's kind of something that you just got to play with on your own. Depending on how you've got everything mounted in height-wise, it's just going to be something you just got to play around with. Just don't cut too much at a time. Little bit by little bit, having some patience will get it accomplished for you. After that, all the hard stuff is pretty much done. Coming up with some mounting options I don't think is going to be that hard. I might just use some simple aluminum angle like I've used a million times in the past, as it's super convenient and really easy to work with if you've got even the most basic of tools around. Something else to mention is you may hear that humming in the background, and what that is that's actually the CNC machines in the other room. Normally when I'm shooting a video, I put those things on hold so they're not making all that racket. But for this one, I left them on because what they are in the other room making right now is the new SCX10 Currie Rock Jock axle. And that is something that I have already installed on this truck as well. I've got those new axles on the front and rear of this car, and I've also installed our new Incision Link set all throughout this truck as well. Now, on these new Currie Rock Jocks, I'm actually using all stock internals for right now. Stock locker, stock shafts, everything. And that's because this turned into just that one last test fitting that I was doing with all stock parts to make sure that everything on these new Curries was 100% ready to go before we released them to the public. I wanted to take this video and go over some of the features of these new Curries that are a little bit different than the ones that we've released in the past. On the SCX10-II size axle, like the AR60 and SCX10 of the past, these axles are also fully licensed by Currie and laser engraved with their logo. Starting with the rear axle. In the past, the Curries that we've built have used a tube design where the center section was one part and then tubes slid in from either end. With the new SCX10-II, we went away from that design and back to a single one-piece design as far as the tube and center section went. With this size of an axle, to get everything looking as scale as possible, this seemed like the best way to go. Now, if you're familiar with full-size axles mostly being stock in the full-size world, you will normally think that the pinion face is parallel with the differential face. That's how most stock axles in the full-size world and the RC world are, and that's scaled down to the Axial AR44 axle as well. Our Currie Rock Jock 60 is modeled after the Currie Enterprises Rock Jock axle. Now, the full-size Currie Rock Jock axle features a diff cover that's rotated up for a little bit of an increased ability for this axle to slide over the rocks, and we scaled that down into this axle just like we did the Axial SCX10 and AR60 style axles. Now, on the AR44 size axle for the Currie, we decided to integrate the upper link mounts into that diff cover. This simplifies the axle, keeps it nice and clean looking, and it does not require an additional truss to be included. This axle is, however, built to accept an optional truss that will be available down the road. Another feature to the design of this axle is the bearing retainers that are used to hold the ring gear into the axle. Now, if you're familiar with some of the other Vanquish axles like the V2 AR60 axle or the F9 axles, you will have seen the one-piece bearing retainer system that's used. This simple one-piece bearing retainer slides over the bearings and completely encloses them and doesn't add any pinching force to a bearing, which can prematurely have your bearings fail and can cause binding in your axles. With that bearing retainer installed onto each side of that ring gear and locker assembly, you then drop it down in one piece into the axle and secure it with the 4 screws that the bearing retainers have. If you've owned a set of the Currie axles in the past, the rear axles have always used a snap ring style to retain the rear axle shafts. Instead, on this one, for a little bit easier installation, we went to a standard style bearing cap where it just slides over the end and is retained with 2 M3x4 simple button head screws. Also worth mentioning is that since we have integrated the lockout into the rear axle, you do have a much more fluid looking one-piece rear housing. By removing the need to slide on an additional straight axle adapter, we were able to also include a double shear shock mount in the rear axle as well, just giving you a little bit more security to how your shocks mount. The front axle has even more features than the rear axle had. It does have the double shear shock mounting locations like we talked about on the rear. It uses the diff cover as the upper link mount, and the panhard mount is also integrated into this axle rather than on that C-hub. And speaking of C-hubs, the C-hubs on this axle are built in as well. The reason that this was done is it does give a much more scale appearance than those additional slide-on style C-hubs. The caster is set at 10 degrees on these axles, just like is shown with the stock Axial SCX10-II C-hubs. The biggest concern with integrating C-hubs is that sometimes people have a tendency to strip out the mounting holes for their knuckles. What we came up with is a replaceable chromoly threaded steel insert that goes into that C-hub. So even if you were able to strip the threads in chromoly, it's replaceable. However, you're probably never going to strip the threads in a chromoly insert like that. It's much stronger than an aluminum thread would be. The threaded inserts simply slide in to that C-hub, and then they are keyed into that inner C-hub so that they will not spin when you're tightening down your kingpin. Now, I mentioned that I replaced the stock Axial aluminum links with some incision links on this car. The reason that I did that is, while those aluminum links are a nice metal link that is not going to bend most likely, the rod ends that Axial uses are a little bit soft and have the tendency to stretch and become pretty loose at that point. Now, that is most evident in the steering when you put a big servo in it. And I've got a monster servo in this one. So with that, throwing on a set of links that I've had here was an easy call and something that I just did to keep a stronger rod end on this car. So with those major upgrades covered in this video, that'll pretty much wrap it up for what I wanted to tackle today. Next time you're going to see me finally get all of the body pieces securely mounted, including that interior. I'm also going to throw some paint on it, and then I've got a new set of freaky skins to install on this that are going to give this thing a weathered look without having to do any of that higher detail paint work. Super easy to install. We're going to go over that. I'm really excited with how these things turned out, and I'm looking forward to getting them installed onto this car. Thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate it. We'll see you on the next one. Thanks for all the comments on the latest videos, and I appreciate all of you guys for watching the channel. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys on the next one.